we're talking overheating. Most budget and even pro sports videography is done with mirrorless cameras these days. But unfortunately, unlike camcorders and cinema cameras, mirrorless cameras don't have internal fans. So they tend to get pretty hot when filming for long periods of time. This might not be a big deal for most videographers who just record a few clips here and there over the course of an hour or so, but for us sports videographers who often record almost non-stop for 2 hours straight, mostly in warm to hot environments, it is a huge deal. Because the last thing you want is your camera to shut down in the fourth quarter when the game's on the line. So in this video, I'm giving you 9 tips that can all have a huge impact on the heat management of your mirrorless camera. But first, to address it properly, we need to understand exactly where all this heat is coming from. You see, there are 3 sources of heat when it comes to mirrorless cameras, or any camera for that matter. The first source of heat comes from within the camera itself. Basically, the harder your camera is working, the warmer it gets. So a lot of that heat can be managed by the settings you're using. But more on that later. The second source of heat is your environment. And that's something we don't have much control over, obviously. So for that, we're gonna look at accessories like this Ulanzi camera cooling fan, for example, and explore how helpful it can actually be in that situation. And the last source of heat is the actual sun. Obviously, this one is specific to outdoor sports because when filming in broad daylight, yes, the temperature can get quite up there, but the sunlight hitting your camera directly is also a problem that we need to address. So without further ado, let's get into my 9 tips to prevent your camera from overheating. My first tip is the most obvious one, which is to set the auto power off temperature setting to high. Doing this will massively improve the amount of time that your camera can film before overheating and shutting down automatically. This setting is available on all Sony cameras, but only on the most recent Canon cameras apparently. And by default, it is always set to standard, so it's important for you to change it to high every time you reset your settings. Unfortunately, I have no idea if other brands like Panasonic and Nikon have this feature as well, so please let us know in the comments if you know. My second tip is simple but effective. Always make sure to open your LCD screen and keep it to the side or as far as possible from the body. That LCD screen actually produces a fair bit of heat and also prevents some of the hot air inside your camera from coming out when it's in the closed position. My next tip is to use a tripod when possible because a tripod would allow you to take your hands off the camera. Your hands are usually quite warm when filming for a while, and that's definitely not helping. Plus, just like the LCD screen, they make it harder for hot air to leave the camera body. The other thing you can do with a tripod, since your hands are no longer on the camera, is to maximize the airflow by opening every little door on the camera body, like the door to your SD card, the battery door. Basically, you want to make it easier for hot air to get out and cool air to get in. My next tip refers back to something I said earlier. The more you make the camera work, the warmer it gets. So my tip is to go easy on your camera as much as possible. For example, if you don't really need 4K footage, then shoot in 1080p. And if you don't need 10-bit color, shoot in 8-bit. And if you don't intend to slow down your footage in post-production, stick to a 24 or 30 frames per second frame rate. Tip number 5 applies to the same logic but in a slightly different way. My 5th tip is to use faster memory cards because constant buffering on your memory card forces your camera to work for longer periods of time. So by using faster cards, you're releasing resources faster, which allows the camera to stay inactive when it's not writing data. Tip number 6 is to use a V-mount battery, but in a very specific way. First of all, you want the battery to be as far away from the camera body as possible for the same reasons we mentioned earlier. But also, and that's really important, you need to power your camera through a USB-C cable and not a dummy battery cable like this one. Unfortunately, USB-C ports are not available on every camera, but if yours has one, doing it this way will make a world of difference. Because the battery is usually the first thing to get super hot inside your camera. So by powering your camera another way, we completely remove this huge source of heat from within the camera. And in case you were wondering, I have used a dummy battery before and it gets just as hot as a real battery. So USB-C is definitely the way to go. My next tip is pretty basic and applies to all. I probably should have started with this one actually. The tip is to simply turn off your camera during breaks. If you're not filming during the halftime break, during timeouts, or any other type of break, shut your camera off and allow it to rest for a little while. Tip number 8 is not my last one, but it is a big one. I'm talking about using an external cooling fan like this one. This is the Ulanzi camera cooling fan, the upgraded version. You basically attach it to your camera as such, turn it on, and then you can use it either in mode 1, which is not super powerful but lasts up to 85 minutes, or you can use it in mode 2, which is more powerful but only lasts up to 70 minutes. I tried the Ulanzi fan with a Sony A7C II at a basketball game the other day in a venue where in the past I had overheating issues every single time, no matter the camera, including my Sony FX3 by the way. To be clear though, unlike the other cameras, the FX3 didn't actually shut down because as a cinema camera, it does have an internal fan, but the overheating warning did show up on my screen and stayed there as long as I kept filming after that, which has never happened to me with this camera anywhere else. But this time with the A7C II shooting in 4K 60, 10-bit color at the highest bitrate, I didn't get any overheating warnings or shutdowns through the entire game, and I was using the Ulanzi fan in mode 1 only. I did turn off my camera at halftime to give it a short break and also used that time to recharge the Ulanzi fan as much as I could just to be safe. I haven't used the Ulanzi fan that much since then to be honest, but from my experience with it so far, I can tell you that it does make a big difference. I don't think that using this fan necessarily guarantees that your camera won't overheat, but if you combine it with most of the tips I've given you so far, I think your chances of getting through an entire game are extremely good. The only bad thing I have to say about this fan is regarding the way it latches on to the camera, which is a shame because this is the exact thing that Ulanzi was trying to upgrade with this new version. The first version was way worse than this. It was using suction cups and it was working terribly. So Ulanzi, to their credit, listened to their consumers and released this upgrade, which is way better, but not perfect. Once the fan is in place, you can move slow or fast, you can even shake your camera pretty vigorously in all directions, and the fan will always stay on. But if you touch the fan in an awkward spot, it can pop out very easily. To be honest, it didn't fall at all, not even once when I was filming, so I can't say that this is a big issue. But I can imagine that if you're holding your camera a bit carelessly in between takes, the fan will probably pop out once or twice during a game. By the way, this external fan is meant to be somewhat universal. You can use it with most Sony, Canon, and Nikon mirrorless cameras, and for the exact list of compatible cameras, I've added a link in the description which will lead you to the latest version of that list, and that's also where you'll find other valuable information about price, features, and specs. My last tip is specific to outdoor sports. Like I said at the beginning, it's one thing to deal with warm weather, but filming in direct sunlight will make things way worse. So in this situation, my tip is to get your camera some shade by any means necessary. If there's no natural shade available, my suggestion is to buy a camera umbrella, and again, I'll put a link to one in the description. Otherwise, if you're done spending money on gear, I get it. You can always build your own sunshade with a screw-in hot shoe mount and a little bit of cardboard. So yeah, go film some sports and let me know how you go with those tips. Otherwise, if you want to know more about the Sony A7C II, check out my review by clicking the thumbnail on your screen right now, and I'll see you guys there.